All right. Hi there, Max.
Hello, Saul.
This has been a long time coming.
A lot has happened since the last time we spoke using this medium.
Yes, so much, really. It feels like that was almost a different incarnation.
A bit.
Yeah, did you get caught up in this nor'easter at all? This crazy weather
Which
pattern?
one?
Yeah, yeah, right. It seemed
Um,
like a bunch.
we haven't had a lot of storming here, if that's what you mean. Our air quality has been better actually than it was in August, so that it's been very pleasant and often sunny here. I've been doing some sun gazing in the morning and in the evening that I didn't think I could do because we're not in a spot where the sun is like close to the horizon. But I've been doing that a little more, and the weather's just been very nice for it. Have you been getting storms?
Yeah, we had about nearly a week or the better part of a week of just rain and off and on bad weather, which is very strange for Florida. It's this part of Florida anyway. We don't have long stretches typically like that, and the ocean has been all churned up and pretty unsurfable, and so that's been a bit of a drag. I was looking forward to a little more surfing here in October. So far that hasn't
I'm
happened.
sorry. I'm sorry that it interrupted the surfing. The surfing sounds really great.
Yeah, that's what really matters. Everything else is just, bread and circus and responsibility, but the surfing is where I tend to tap into my inner child.
I admit to being really in love with thunderstorms, and I might be feeling a bit of a struggle with a little bit of envy that you are having rainstorms and we have not been having them, which might bring them to me
Oh, it might,
very
it might.
soon.
Could shut down your meeting. That's right. I know the last time we talked, we were talking, this was maybe I'll link if I can remember to do this in the show notes to our last conversation, but we were talking a lot about trafficking and trauma and other subjects. And since then, I ended up writing a book that touches on some of that and goes into that entire way of looking at the world from a perspective of somebody. Well, let me unpack this a little bit differently. I think I've introduced the cult concept into the discussion more directly by writing The World Cult and You, and I was thinking maybe we could just start off talking about your experience of this material, the experience of the book so far, and we can get into all the intersectionality because it's there's so many cross currents with this discussion. But I wanted to start by just giving you the floor, if that's okay, to talk about your experience of reading The World Cult and You so far.
I think I'm on chapter 4. It's really well done. I'm really enjoying it. The major connection points for me personally, are that this subject. So, like when you started to publish posts on your Substack about cult behavior, and one of your major focuses was that it's primarily the cult minions that hold it in place, people who are following instructions, people who are running the patterns that benefit the cult leaders, or the intentional traffickers. We could talk about cults, we can talk about trafficking pretty much in the same breath. The major thing that I have been working to communicate since the advent of intuitive public radio, for I mean 7 or 8 years, depending on when we measure it from, has been that a lot of people are running what are essentially trafficking patterns that they don't even necessarily know they're running. Some people know they're doing it and they take advantage of it. A lot of people have no idea that they're doing things that serve the interests of human traffickers. And it was that was really, for me, the main reason I was trafficked, was because people in my communities had no idea how they were helping to hold those trafficking pathways in place. And the way that you speak about cult dynamics aligns very closely with that. And when I became very involved with other sex trafficking survivors and survivors of other elements of human trafficking that go on, many people don't necessarily realize that what they've encountered is hardship that comes from trafficking intersections. People don't realize how close they are to the trafficking activities. So there are a lot of survivors of various other situations in our network. But the more I worked with other people, the more we compared notes, the more we documented our experiences, it became more and more clear that this was one of the biggest problems, that so many people in our communities had no idea they were helping the perpetrators, really often very, very directly, without realizing it. And there's a lot that you describe in the World Cult NU, that just it refers to this pretty specifically, and it's really great for me to get to absorb that in someone else's language. So I'm really grateful for that part, and I'm really enjoying reading it.
Oh, I appreciate that very much. I definitely am not trying to self-aggrandize in this conversation at all. I'm really, really interested in your thoughts on it, and I'm seeking your assistance in unpacking some of the implications of the book for people that it might be able to help in some way. And one piece that just immediately came up for me listening to you just now was this connection between cult behavior or situations and human trafficking of various kinds. And I would love for you to just dive into that a little deeper for people who may not really get that connection, because it is and you've taught me some about this connection over our various conversations, public and private. It's not always the most obvious connection, but I would like to benefit from your wisdom on this subject, because hearing you talk about it, it becomes very obvious where the connection is.
So one of the ways that we understand this in the network is that if we're talking about the forces of colonial imperialism, we're essentially talking about human trafficking. We're talking about the ways that influences that have cornered a lot of wealth in whatever way reach in to control populations and control economics and influence people's opinions and conversations, and be able to direct the flows of resources in the way they want, and be able to control land the way they want, where the people living closest to the land are often hurt the worst, and separated from the land in violent ways. And so when we're having this conversation now, after generations of that kind of influence being applied to all of our spaces, all of these structures being created that many or most or all of us grew up feeling like this is normal, like this is what the normal world is like. But it's not exactly what the normal world is like. It's a very contrived artificial set of structures that we're supposed to take for granted, that are supposed to feel normal to us, but it diverts nourishment in a way that actually is not, it's not normal or healthy for our bodies, and our bodies know it. Our bodies know that something is wrong. Our bodies are not healthy in these circumstances. Our social interactions are really affected, so that our relationships don't quite work the way we think they're going to work, because we've been so influenced by all of these things. And when we talk about the way in a cult format, relationships are co-opted. There is abusiveness. There is being forced to do something in a certain way that doesn't necessarily benefit you or include your interests or your well-being. Having your labor or your energy or your resources extracted from you. It's not consensual. It's not sovereign. And you may or may not be very clear on what kind of violence you're experiencing, because we're not allowed to say that it's violent. Those are the kinds of circumstances that trafficking influences thrive in. Trafficking operatives and predatory opportunists can step into a substrate like that and take advantage of almost anybody they want, because everybody is so disconnected from their bodies, from their natural forms of nourishment, from the true idea of a community body, not what we've come to think of as community, but people living closely with the land and preparing meals together and singing songs together and telling stories as a way of communicating wisdom through the generations of staying connected to our ancestors. A lot of that has been wiped out and replaced with industrial modes, and like the entertainment complex has taken over the parts of our brains that are for storytelling and making songs together that keep us connected to the collective body, because traffickers benefit from becoming the middlemen in relationships with everyone, everywhere, all the time. So if you have to use their technology, like if you have to use social media to communicate, you have traffickers in the middle of your relationships with other people. If you rely on a grocery store chain instead of being able to grow your own food because you've been cut off from that wisdom, from those skill sets, you have trafficking interests in the middle of your relationships with the land and with your own sources of nourishment. And when we try to step up and say something about that, and be really clear about it, it gets very transparent in terms of, if you know how cult dynamics function, the kind of pushback that happens when we try to say, well, actually, it would be healthier for me to do this. It would be healthier for my family if we do this other thing instead. And then you notice that there are various abuse methodologies and silencing methodologies that are brought into play, not only intentionally by people who seem to directly benefit from that, but also from all of the people who have been running the programming from the abuse structures through the generations, that they don't even know what it is they're defending. They're defending their right to stay imprisoned, and their right to imprison others. And that's how I was trafficked. I'll give you a sort of, I'll try to make it a short version. I became very ill when I was living in Texas. Around 2013, my body started crashing, and we didn't know what was going on. And what I found out later was that it was largely the environmental toxicity. There were a bunch of different toxic exposures in my environments. There was a lot of EMF in my environments. And initially, what took down my body were all of these intersections of environmental illness and toxic injury that became more and more severe. And the people around me didn't realize that they had been programmed to push back if I would say, actually the doctors and the establishment are not giving me useful information. They're making things worse for me. Here's what my body says I need to do. Here's what my body says is going on. I'm being poisoned by something around me. I have to change something about my environment in order to be safe and healthy. I have to do these health restoring things in order to be okay. And they were so anchored in allegiance to what the establishment that they thought was taking care of them, that they actively prevented me from regaining my health and stability, so that it just compounded and compounded until it was quite a lot more severe than that. But that's what originally made me vulnerable to the human trafficking influences that were active in my communities that I didn't know about because I was not vulnerable enough to them yet. And so all of those people around me were behaving in a way that reflects cult modalities, but they didn't, most of them didn't know it. They didn't know that they were doing that, but they were helping the trafficking interests in our communities by doing it because they had that allegiance to these huge mechanisms of commerce that are active in our healthcare and other kinds of resources that so many people rely on.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for sharing that story. It's very intense, and it brought up a lot about, for me, my experience of when I became ill back in my 20s, at the hands of the medical establishment, and I was poisoned in my own way. And it took me a while to realize that fully. I realized intellectually, but it took me a while to really grok the extent to which my emotional attachment or my emotional vulnerability created these physical vulnerabilities. So that, when you're talking, I'm thinking about you kind of in that energy grid with these people being a certain way and perhaps already feeding on your energy in some ways. And then you become more susceptible to the toxicity. This is kind of how cults work. They are part of the feeding mechanism for the world cult, and what I'm calling the great parasite at the very top of the world cult, where all of this energy is siphoned upward out of people to power up the reality construct that most people take for just the normal, quote unquote, real world. But it's actually an installation, an overlay. Some people want to call it a simulation or a simulacrum. I like calling it a dreamscape because I think we're really talking about just different dreams that we're having. And I think it's much more organic than any kind of technological overlay. But, you really traced some beautiful connections there between trafficking and cultism. One of the issues that I run into in sharing this information with people is that people don't want to hear it because either it triggers them directly, or they think they're not part of that problem, or it's not part of their problem. People don't realize that the world is a cult. And when we talk about cults, we're just talking about subcults of the reality construct. That is not our own construct, but it is a construct that we help maintain. I say we, meaning people in general. You do that, you help maintain it until you don't help maintain it, until you step away from it, until you walk away from it, and then you begin deflating it. Maybe a little tiny bit only, but somewhat.
So there's part of this, and I don't remember what the post was called, and I think I've read some of it in the book so far. I don't know if I've gotten to that part of the book as much yet, but there was one of your posts about cults that was talking about the great parasite. I refer to it in my brain as the adversary, like this ultimate conceptualization. And I remember sending you excited messages when I read the post, because it was so exactly what we in the Intuitive Network really need to be centering on a lot more, because we can get caught up in these smaller stories but we have a lot of power when we open ourselves up to stepping out of those smaller stories. And the way that you've described this, and tell me if this resonates with what you're trying to describe. For me, it evokes the sense of, if we are all part of the greatest possible conceptualization of a living organism that is all things and all absence of things, all at once, this whole massive unknowable living organism that we are all part of, and there is a oneness, and then in order for us to know ourselves and one another, there has to be an agent of separation. There has to be something that cuts us off from ourselves in order to become many living beings instead of one living being. And I think of the adversary in those terms, and a lot of what you've said about the parasite resonates that for me. Does that align with the way that you are thinking about it?
Absolutely, 100%. The basic conceptualization here is that we are the creator. We are the creator experiencing itself as not being the creator originally, and then figuring out that we're the creator, but not really knowing how to create consciously, and then getting better and better at that over time. And that involves walking away from the world cult. It's funny. It's almost like I liken the great parasite to a kind of mad professor or a histrionic teacher who's overplaying the part of the devil or Lucifer or evil, all of these things that we might project onto it, to really to just goad us into becoming. What happens, however, is that it's such a difficult classroom and such a difficult exam to pass that people get sucked down into it and can't get out of it. It's really like it's a PhD level course in becoming. It really is. It's very challenging. So then you have all of these people who are running their cult scripts, their human downloads, as Matt over at Quantum of Conscience likes to say, and they don't even know they're doing it. And they can't see that any of this applies to them, and yet it defines their entire experience of so-called reality.
And it keeps feeding itself too.
I'm sorry?
It keeps feeding itself once you're in that state. So we look at this a lot of ways through how people are programmed, and how people are
held. Really fast, Max, just before I lose it, because let me just speak to that point really fast.
Oh yes, sure.
Because really what we're talking about is something that we as creators created, and that is the great parasite. If you want to call that the artificial intelligence, I don't think it's artificial. I think it's an intelligence. It's an organic being of some kind. It may be just an egregore or a tulpa or a dream being of some kind. That's fine. But whatever it is, it's playing the role of bad guy in the construct, and it's receiving our thought energy, our perception energy, our loosh, as it travels up the food chain of the world cult. And then it takes that energy and it maintains the world cult. But it's perfectly willing to give that energy back when it's taken back. And you don't have to ask its permission. You just do it. And the more people that do that, the more you disempower the parasite, and you take back your own power. Basically, the rules of the game seem to be that it will loose you if you let yourself be loosed. I just did a really funny blog that I haven't posted yet, and I'm going to turn it into a little video as well. And it's called "Reverse Looshing the Looshers," and it's basically where you do a spiritual or energetic aikido on the great parasite or on cults and cult leaders, whoever, and you take back the energy. And this is a natural part of the game that we're in, the game that we're playing. It's just part of the rules, and it's a teaching tool, almost just like a meter of energy to show which direction your energy is moving in. Is it moving away from you or to you? Is it disempowering you or empowering you? And the whole lesson is to become empowered. And the more you become empowered, basically, you're talking about raising your consciousness and your ability to manifest. Ultimately, I think the goal is to become so powerful that you can step out of not just the world cult, but the world and travel on into infinity and become a creator of worlds in full consciousness. I think that's the game here. But right now, we are just trying to figure out what's going on in this world construct and how to navigate that. So that's kind of the first step. And what I've attempted to do in the World Cult and You is to give people a series of concepts, frameworks, and tools, very pragmatic, practical tools to do what I'm describing here.
A lot of the reason that it resonates for me is because we do a lot of work with helping people deprogram from trafficking programming. And it really does require that kind of conscientiousness, at least from people helping others deprogram, and then increasingly from the person who's deprogramming themselves after having gotten some leverage points in it. But one of the reasons that I and others have found so much value in your work is that there's a lot that you verbalize that helps to anchor what releases those forms of cult programming or trafficking programming. And most people, most places don't even realize that's possible. People tend to reject and exile one another instead of realizing that a program is being run because they just don't know what to do. But it's actually really possible for us to support one another and support ourselves in creating our own world from within the world construct that is unfortunately very problematic, but it's teaching us such powerful things. We can do more and more with that, the more aware we are of it, and repairing our language neurology has been a huge part of that, because cults and traffickers destroy relational verbal neurology as part of holding people in place. So your language structures, we have added into our awareness of how we can conceptualize these things and tell one another about them and represent our own experiences. That releases people from cult violence. It's super, super nifty.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I've been working with a concept that basically you go from in the cult, the world cult, or in the trafficking system that we're talking about, you go from a kind of group think, which is the download from the great Parasite, which gives its mind to people so that we end up thinking with its mind. We're not even thinking with our own minds. On some subconscious level, we're interacting with that installation in our minds, but really we haven't found our own voice because we're being controlled at a very fundamental level. And then that group think translates into what I call cult speak, one word. And cult speak can involve the deletion of language or the insertion of confusing language. So if you look at everything that's going on with politics and gender ideology and shaming and everything in the world, it's all designed to basically turn people's what remains of people's ability to think by themselves, just to basically turn it into mush so that they can absolutely be fully controlled.
We talk about it in terms of neurological injury, really overarchingly. There was something, it was in your book. It was in a quote. I recorded something about it. I don't remember where it is right now. There was a paper you were quoting from Richard Allen Miller.
Yeah,
I
one,
think it
either
was
embryonic holography or a holographic concept of reality.
there was this specific thing in there that it lit me up when I saw it. I thought there's more about this. It was something about, maybe it was the holography. He was talking about the nervous system connecting everything.
Yes. I
And
have a quote if you would like me to share it so that people
oh yes,
are talking
that
about.
would be awesome.
Yeah, it basically says that Um, yes. I want to make sure that is the exact quote. So this is in my, this is a quote I also include in The World, Cult, and You and the relevant chapter. And he says that the DNA appears to be the projector of a biohologram, both at cellular and organismic levels. And just as an aside, I talk all about this new bogus truther controversy over the existence of DNA and that kind of thing. I go into some detail in this book about that. So if DNA is triggering you right now, just read the book. So this means that DNA is responsible for creating a complex pattern of three-dimensional electromagnetic standing and moving wavefronts in the space that the organism occupies. We believe that these wavefronts interact with, interpenetrate, and interdetermine the physical substance that makes up the creature, us, right? The biohologram has characteristic properties that include the ability to affect the DNA that occupies specific positions within the biohologram. In such a situation, the nervous system constitutes, first and foremost, a coordination mechanism that integrates DNA projections all across all of the cells in the biohologram, aligning these cellular holograms and linking the whole creature hologram. So when you basically fritz the neurology, you are separating the creature from its mind. And I think that's fundamentally what's happening to begin with early on as we are acculturated, as we're brought into the culture. The great parasite is giving us its mind as we learn how to be a member of society. That's what indoctrination really is. We are given a mind to think with, and it's not our own.
It's been so exciting for me to discover the ways that you refer to this stuff, because not only do you describe it from your perspective, your ways of understanding it, but you also make lots of really good references to other people's research. You organize the way you communicate about it in a way that is very, it's straightforward, it's organized, it's been possible for me to follow even in states of really severe neurological injury. And this is just one of a bunch of different things where in the network we started comparing notes as the most severely disabled people, abandoned by everyone. No health professionals knew how to help us or wanted to talk to us. We were just being left for dead over and over and over and over again. We built infrastructure to start to compare notes, and we started discovering things based on our ability to compare notes about our situations where people like us don't get heard from at all otherwise. And one of those things was how extensively neurological injury specifically has been and is being deployed to cause all of these different problems that essentially make people vulnerable to trafficker programming, so that they would keep the trafficking pathways active without even knowing the traffickers were there.
Yes, I agree completely. It's I mean, if you extract your own emotional response or your own, triggered state of being around this topic, just hats off to the great parasite. We're talking about an absolutely brilliant criminal mastermind here that somehow we are partially at least responsible for creating to run this classroom. And it's a great actor, in addition to its wonderful sort of spy genius, to be able to pull all of this off, and the ultimate manipulator of human perception and behavior.
And also a wonderful teacher.
Absolutely. Well,
I mean,
one of the
it can
memes
be
in the book
terrible,
is
but
one of the memes in the book shows this big parasite, right? And it says, meet your head teacher or the head teacher of this realm.
I feel a great affection for that teacher. And it can be very difficult to have this kind of conversation when people are suffering in very extreme ways. It is really violent, the stuff that is going on this planet. And there is a place we can come to about it to recognize how much power we are being given because we have the opportunity to process and engage with the solutions in this context. It is massive, the capacity that we have to make beautiful worlds, because we have this evil mastermind teacher in our reality, whatever, doing the marionette things, pulling the strings, flipping the toggles, playing this role, overstating the evilness, right? But once you start to see the overstatedness of the evilness, it actually gets hard to unsee unless you get really neurologically injured again, and that it can be hard to hold on to. But the more we anchor it with one another, we can grow back those neurons really fast. Relational neurological repair is a really powerful thing, and it gets harder and harder to forget that there's a greater context here where what we're learning is so much more powerful and magical than any of the forces that separated us from ourselves or one another in the first place. That's huge.
Beautiful too. You said it so well. You're just exactly right as far as I'm concerned. And I think what you brought to the table in that and what you just said is incredibly important. It's this idea, and I don't touch on this as much as I should have, that it is the intersection with the what I'm calling the great parasite that provides an almost endless source of energy for you to heal and transform your own life, and possibly beyond that, your own world. And that's what I meant by this loosh, this loosh meter. Is it coming to you or from you? Either way, it can move. And if it comes back into you, it can transform right back into chi or prana or mojo, whatever you want to call it. But when it's taken from you, then it debilitates you, and it takes away those things, and it takes away your consciousness, your ability to think. So it's really interacting with the great parasite and the reality construct in a certain way, from a certain mindset or consciousness, where we don't see ourselves as victims, where we see ourselves as making choices. And in making different choices, we can begin to reverse loosh the looshers. And when you do that, you empower yourself and you disempower them until they're being disempowered, and they decide to take back their own energy instead of getting it, let's say, from the world cult.
There's this transformative process that we can engage, but it's not just we who have survived challenging circumstances. It's also all of the, I mean, the people who are violent predators, people who are trafficking operatives, who are intentionally, knowingly activating harm through these systems. These people, they're not in it because they want to be in it. They're in it because they were in a situation or they were born into it. They've never had a better option. When we activate these kinds of powers of holding ourselves and being centered and grounded in peace and love for ourselves and for one another, belief in ourselves and in one another, we're creating circumstances where traffickers decide not to be traffickers anymore.
Yeah,
and that's not just humans.
Or you can create something that doesn't turn into a cult. It's brilliant what you're saying. You're also kind of laying out the framework for how one could come together with friends and other people in groups and not have it transform into a cult.
Well, that's what we've been really studying in the intuitive network, because severely disabled people end up not even being able to interface with one another unless we have really clear understandings of how to avoid harming one another. Because people who are in terrible, torturous suffering thrash and can really hurt anybody in their vicinity. So the only way that we've been able to interface with one another, to collaborate over these years, is by making sure that if in our space, in our conversation, whatever modalities we're using, we can never, ever, ever allow traffic modalities, traffic patterns to be run. Like, a lot of people will take some of them for granted and be like, well, we don't know another way to do things. In order to survive physically, we had to find another way to do it. And some people brought up in our groups, when you started talking about community, about how, pretty much any community turns from a community with a community leader into a commune with a dictator, or a cult with a dictator, or something like that. And that's what we found to be true. The reason that we've built what we've built is because we didn't find any community that wasn't affected by these cult modalities. We had to build a totally different way of doing it. And at first, I think a lot of people just felt like it could never happen, but I wouldn't be alive if we hadn't done that. There's no way that I would be alive right now on the planet. So we know that it's possible, but wow, do we have to believe in it? And we have to really focus and do it. We have to keep practicing it. And then what we find is traffickers won't bother us, really, because we're not in their reality. And then what happens is traffickers kind of start to get the sense that something else is going on. There might be a better sense of nourishment. And we haven't made it big enough to know what those effects are. Like, we can never know exactly what's happening, but we know it protects us from violence. We know it protects us from perpetrators, because they fugue out and they get confused and they wander off. That kind of thing happens when we use these modalities.
It's fascinating. I'm going to be sharing this in my little blog that I mentioned about reverse loosening the losers. But it's so on the subject, and I wanted to share this little moment. There's a moment in my novel Snooze where the protagonist, the hero, Max Diver, he's in the other world of dreams trying to save his father who's gotten lost there. And Max is spinning off of an earlier childhood moment when he was being bullied very tremendously at school, and he was in 6th grade because he was different, and he was nicknamed Woo Woo because he was this different kid with these different abilities, and he gets totally bullied by one of his classmates. And it's so strong that it awakens, the bullying is so intense that it awakens Max's dream body. And when that does, he basically kicks this guy's ass without even knowing what he's doing. All right. And then years later, as he's harnessing his ability to deal with power, essentially, is what the book is about. It's about the siddhis, the Siddhis, the Hindu powers that we have within us, the kind of almost like real superpowers that exist. As he's learning to do that, there's a very pivotal moment towards the end of the story where he is in a group of people that are being attacked by these dinosaurs. These flying dinosaurs, as they're trying to escape a certain area in the rescue attempt where his father is concerned. So these people have a very different understanding of what it means to protect themselves, the people in this other world that he's visiting. And they don't use violence, they use peace as a kind of weapon. And they, like, on their ships, they have something called a pacifier, which is an energy device that sends out this energy that basically pacifies the environment, and it takes away discordant thoughts. And essentially, you might say it takes away the mind parasite installation or something like that, just like real power does. When you have real power that you are personally sourcing, that's your power, it's not somebody else's, then it can actually undo the parasitic mind installation, or at least keep it at bay or disable it temporarily, depending on how much power we're talking about. So there's this moment I was going to share where Max is, the dinosaurs are flying in, and they're about to be wiped out by these very powerful beasts, and his friend Karul on the boat is manning the the pacifier. Okay, so this is the little description. It's 3 short paragraphs. Carole appeared to spin the ebony pit on top of the white avocado like a ball bearing in his direction. A shimmering beam of energy erupted from the device, making the air dance all around like a heat mirage as it zapped Max with a direct hit. He was ready. Similar to an Aikido master channeling and amplifying his opponent's own energy against him, he absorbed the pacifier's beam, only to project it back outward in a rapidly expanding sphere. The effect was like a peace bomb exploding. Wave upon wave of pacifying energy pulsed to the farthest horizons. Disoriented, the Thunderbirds simply sailed away on the breeze.
I really love that a lot. It's been especially interesting when I have absorbed pieces of that novel. I haven't read it from the beginning to the end, but I've dipped into a lot of different places in it sort of non-linearly over time. And I started calling myself Max as a response to the situations that I was in where Megan Elizabeth Morris died, and
Mm.
the people around her did not recognize that death. And so I couldn't allow people to call me Megan anymore. It was really painful to have them fail to recognize that death. So that the name Max comes from my father's father, my paternal grandfather. When he was a baby, he was named Max, and then later in his life, he was named Mac. And so I took his names,
Oh, that's
and
great.
then I combined them. But reading about your Max in Snooze, I mean, mostly listening. I've been listening to the podcast audios that you released most of the time. It has felt like connecting my avatar self with this other avatar self. There's a kind of kinship there that I don't know exactly how to verbalize, but I have really enjoyed, and I love finding out more about that story because my memories of reading it are very like this and then this and then this, but it's all out of order. So at some point, I'm going to need to read it from the beginning to the end, so I get to actually experience it the way you published it.
Over on YouTube and on my Substack, I'm releasing a series of audio visual chapters. So I'm actually creating imagery for the various scenes, and I'm putting it to music, and there's a voiceover. So I've got the first 5 chapters that I published on my YouTube channel, which is Crow Rising, or my Substack, which is soulluckman.substack.com. You can go check out.
That's awesome. I didn't realize you were adding imagery along with the
Yeah, I'm
story.
basically turning it into a kind of like MTV Insta movie.
Dude, I'm so excited to look at those. Thank you for mentioning that.
Well, you inspired that a little bit, Max. It's funny, to hear you talk about Max and your interface with Snooze, because I've just been really keenly aware in our conversations that there are different ways of healing damaged neurology. And often the most powerful healing effects combine different elements, different registers. So putting music with words and imagery seemed to me potentially much more healing than just having the story out there as an audiobook or as text.
I agree. Learning modalities. And another thing would be, if you don't mind me making a suggestion, I don't know if it's even viable, but if you're doing all that work, you might possibly consider releasing DVDs so that people don't have to stream it.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about a fictional or metafictional healing resource. It's a repair resource, majorly.
Mm. I hadn't thought about that. That is very interesting. I'll think about it. I'm still using an AI voice for it.
Mhm.
There's a reason for that. People have all these ideas about AI and all these different, like, people get really triggered by the AI thing. But basically, you can create material so much faster using text to voice, and then combining that with with footage from different sources, it's so much faster than recording it and trying to line that up with the footage. That is an undertaking, and I don't have the time to do it. It's not that I wouldn't want to do it. It's just that I don't have the time, and I don't want to pay somebody to do it. So that's where I am, and it also gives me an interesting creative outlet to. And I'm using a service called Pictory. It gives me a very interesting creative outlet to take a blog or a story. I'm doing the same thing with The World Cult and You. I'm basically turning it into an audio, what I call an audio video book, and you can just watch it and absorb it. I'm putting the text on the screen as well, so that you don't have to have like bad CC, closed caption with misspelling everything and going all over the place. You can just turn that off and watch my CC if you want to, or just listen to it and not even watch the images. But the images do bring something to it, when you're talking about cults and cult leaders and hypnosis and all this kind of thing. To see imagery that reflects that, I don't know, it drives these concepts in pretty deep.
It's really important to have all of those modalities in play, because people can come to understandings and inspirations on that basis in ways they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And I want to say about the using the AI reader, the AI voice, you can release that so much more expediently, and otherwise it's not available to people. People try to set up the ability to read something with an adaptive piece of software, but it's hard to set up. And so when people start to have trouble reading text, it can be really difficult for them to absorb anything that isn't already made into audio for them. And at least having the AI voice is a huge benefit. If it's not possible for somebody to be reading it at that time, it lets you release it and it can be out there benefiting people instead of not. I think that's really
That's
good.
right. That's where I'm coming from. I know that it's not perfect. I would say in terms of naturalness, one being not at all natural and 10 being fully natural, it's probably an 8 or something like that. So
An
it's
8 is not that bad. That's
not that
pretty
bad,
good.
because I've also taken the time to go in and troubleshoot areas where the AI voice was tripped up over certain words or phrasings or pronunciations. And so basically it sounds like the words that are being read or through the AI interface, it does actually sound like what I wrote. So that's good.
That's
Maybe
great.
the emphasis is not always exactly how I would have done it or that kind of thing. And there's can be a little bit of a awkwardness in that occasionally, a lot of times not at all. And the AI voice I'm using for The World Cold and You is a British voice, and it really sounds it's probably more like a 9. It's really, really close. But with Snooze, I wanted to use an American accent. And so I chose one of the readers, an American male voice for that, and it's not quite as realistic sounding as the British voice I chose for The World Cult and You.
I'm really glad that you're spelunking in all of these different ways of delivering content. It's made it so much more possible for me and others to look at your work. And we're coming from situations that are basically impossible, that nobody thinks it's even worth time considering how to help us make contact with content. And one of the reasons that we've been able to make more contact with yours has been that you're using a bunch of different modalities to communicate. So it's really cool.
It's funny, it's a little circle because, part of your feedback has inspired me to do that. So, it's given me like a reason to do it. Like, oh, somebody actually gives a shit, because I really, a lot of the time, a lot of the time I just feel like no one really gives a shit about what I'm doing. Sometimes, I get really, I get a lot of great feedback, but on the projects that I'm really interested in, like, this new one, The World Cold and You, it's really hard to get people behind the damn paywall to read the book, and I'm not going to give away my content. I'm just not going to do it. This is how I make my living and support my family. So, you have to get behind the paywall, and it costs like $19 for a month. And there's like 1,000 different things back there that you can take advantage of. I mean, it's a world. I call it like a one-man Netflix for conscious creators. So it's a really good interface, and it's just going to get better and bigger. I've got all kinds of projects going on. But it's really difficult sometimes to feel. I think also, my choice of material subject matter is so far outside the mainstream that I am dealing in a very small pool of people who are even enough on this wavelength to attempt to care.
I think there are going to be more and more of those people. I think people are going to, it's already happening. It's not in the future. People are increasingly having to seek refuge in ways of thinking and sensing these kinds of, I don't even know how to say it exactly. People are being squeezed out of what they felt was the normal world.
Mm.
The apocalypse as a birth process. It's being made very uncomfortable for all of us in
It
there.
is.
And I mean, there are different levels of that. Like it might be kind of mild, or it might be really, really bad. And people, what people do is people find out, we found our unique sensory equipment, we found our psychic activations, we found out how interconnected our bodies are even when we're totally physically isolated from one another. We had to find that out because of the life-threatening circumstances, and that squeeze, the cult squeeze of the world right now is resulting in people discovering, oh wow, I need a totally different language to understand what's going on. I need a totally different way of learning. I need a totally more unique and open and diverse way of connecting with other people about subjects that I have been fear-mongered and threatened for wanting to talk about. I'm gonna have to find some way into the mystery that we're living in. And there's a lot in your materials that help people to connect with that mystery, not only in terms of being willing to connect with the mystery and having a way of being in contact with the mystery, but you also provide a lot of touch points on the spectrum from like normal mainstreamy sciencey stuff, like research data. There are steps that one can take, and like, here's the mystery, and here's the everyday world where we talk about sciencey data. And like, oh well, here are all these researchers that are actually exploring these different layers of, and there's the mystery, and this is what I've been dealing with, and people didn't believe me and people wouldn't talk to me about it, but these researchers make sense, and there are a bunch of people doing work on it. So you catalog a lot of that stuff, and that's pretty huge to make stepping stones like that in a world like this at the time we're in.
Yeah, I just felt that to be taken seriously. I appreciate all that, Max. I felt that to be taken seriously, even though I didn't personally need it, because I had experienced the mystery, and I had experienced energy and the healing power of it and that sort of thing. You know, I didn't feel the need to prove it to myself, but I really realized if I was going to be taken seriously putting out books about, energetic healing and um, changing our physiology and our consciousness and that sort of thing, that I would have to give some, like a launch pad, like a quote unquote real world launch pad for a lot of people to begin that journey into the unknown. And I've continued to bring in pieces of that, although I really do find that as time goes by, I'm less and less concerned with it. I mean, one of the real realizations that when you get deep into the paradigm that I'm outlining in this new book it becomes clear that there is absolutely no such thing as science, that science is perception, 100%, and that because reality is perception. And so I realized that, I might as well be reading comic books if I'm inclined to read science, because it's all the same thing, really. We're just creating stories over and over again. And as I say in the World Cult and You, we're born storytellers, and our stories have a way of coming true one way or another, and that's our power. And some would say that's our curse. Until we learn how to master that power that just flows out of us as born spellcasters, then we will create either prisons for ourselves or paradises or somewhere in between. But usually it's pretty extreme, especially, in the apocalypse that we're in right now. So I'm glad that you've picked up on my attempts to create those scientific touchstones. I've also tried to do a kind of multidisciplinary thing, multi-genre approach, where I don't separate fact and fiction in this by the same token. They are part of a continuum. So these novels that I'm writing are just as valid, in my view, as the nonfiction that I've put out. And even the humor, like the Angel's Dictionary, which is a kind of satirical deconstruction of all of this apocalypse that we're in right now. The same thing. It has value in terms of helping one understand what the hell is going on.
The bridge between fact and fiction, and the not just the bridge, but the actual the not being different things, essentially. Like they're not actually separate in any of the ways that we've been taught that they are separate. Has been one of the most powerful things for me. I really like how often you invoke dream modalities as well. When we talk about dream travel, a lot of what we talk about is there's dream traveling while sleeping, and there's dream traveling while waking.
Yes.
And when we're aware of dream modalities while waking, and we practice about, recalling our dreams and talking about them and processing them, but then also recognizing how we are present in the dream in our waking lives every moment, all the time, it really brings in a sense of much deeper connectedness with our own strengths and functions that we were misled about, we were gaslighted about in the world that we've come up in. But when we recognize that, it's like people really seem, not everybody, a lot of people seem to really need those steps. I needed those steps from the science, however we want to frame it, because I agree with you that the science construct is this whole set of conversations. But when people have those stepstones, sometimes it really helps them find their true selves to get to have that interplay. And then there's a point where it's not necessary anymore. I think a lot of people have the experience in their bodies of realizing that it's just that there's one story there, and there are all of these other stories that we're experiencing that have been repressed, that we can open up and we can find out what we really are all about if we delve into that. And I've been through a process like that where in my states of most severe neurological injury, if I didn't provide scientific touch points for people I was talking to, it was really life-threatening, me engaging with anybody, me trying to communicate with anybody. But if I could provide research touch points, then I would be somewhat safer trying to get through that set of moments, because my body could be killed so easily. But then as I've rebuilt my neurological, my memory access, my functions, what I'm grounding in is the dreaming. What I'm grounding in is that there isn't actually a difference between my experiences dream traveling while sleeping versus dream traveling while waking. It's somewhat different because the physical world has a slower set of vibrations where things don't, that can't change things as quickly in the waking world. Not maybe not all the time, maybe some of the time. But it's the same process. It's just kind of a different set of environmental structures that I'm working with. I'm not totally sure how to verbalize it yet, but it's been a wonderful journey through all of that, getting to be accompanied by your materials, not only the nonfiction, but the fiction. That's been so good.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I'm glad you're talking about the dreaming stuff because that's where I go at the end of the World Cult and You, as I return to that and to the idea of the dreamscape and the idea that we are dreaming the reality and we have to learn how to dream another dream. This is the kind of shamanic aspect of this path that we really we cannot change ourselves, and certainly no way we can change the world if we can't learn to dream a new dream. And so understanding how dreams work, kind of what's going on there, how to interface with them, how to interact with them, how to cancel them, how to harness their power, and how to understand that you are in a kind of waking dream. All these are absolutely critical skills, and they're intimately involved with the arts of storytelling and writing and other forms of creativity. It's all, in fact, practicing these types of creativity is sort of a way of practicing how to be a better dreamer. And because you're basically doing a version of the dreaming process when you're writing a book or a song or dancing or whatever it is that you're doing. It's why like these magical passes, these shamanic movements can be very helpful because it can put you in the flow state for how dreams actually flow, and then you can begin to steer those things in different directions. So I get into all of this to some degree because I think it's really, really important. Um, there's a final thing I would like to just chat about briefly, which is related to this notion of the way that we're dreaming reality, and it's the way that the great Parasite harnesses cults, either official or unofficial, to bring about various doomsday and apocalyptic scenarios, or at the very least, to keep that discussion very much alive in people's consciousness so that no one can be at peace, no one can deluge and that kind of thing. But I actually think that there's an attempt to create the very scenarios that are being discussed by various doomsday cults, and they're harnessing the power of the cult, the combined loosh of the cult, these people giving that up to this agenda. I'm not saying that even the cult leaders are necessarily aware of this dynamic, but it's happening. And and so what appears to happen is that we're in this massive feedback loop where somebody gets an idea about how things are going to transpire in some kind of apocalyptic way based on whatever data, and they begin researching it. And what happens is the construct, the real quote unquote reality construct, gives back more and more data to support that basic assumption. And before you know it, you have constructed a body of research and data to support this outcome that you're predicting will happen. And then people get behind it and they become part of your cult. And then you start siphoning their loosh, and through you, it flows on up to the great Parasite, which is basically putting that mind installation into people all over the world. And it's seeding the very possibility of that outcome, which basically started out as something indistinguishable from an idea for like a short story or a novel in your head.
Sure. Yeah. I have so much to say about that.
I'm here to hear it.
Oh my gosh. I think that there are really natural, complex, I don't know how to say, complexes of feedback loops, landscapes of feedback, like feedback loop ecologies, that happen wherever there's a lot of energy going into something, a lot of information being organized. And that has been something that I've delved into a lot in terms of, if we find ourselves in a reality where we are really being kicked around in some really horrifying ways, how do we go about shifting that reality? Because we're here. What powers do we have? Where we focus makes a big difference. What we dream together makes a big difference. What we put our energy into makes a big difference. And I sort of think that the same modalities that make manifestation very powerful, not only for an individual, but in a group of relationships, in a collective body, manifestation can, you were just, there was something you were referring to in the book that I just read last night, and I was like, oh, I need to bring that up, but I don't remember what it was right now. That you were talking about, maybe the, oh no, it was digging a hole to China. You said if enough of the people think that you can dig a hole to China, maybe they'll actually end up being able to dig a hole to China. It was something like that.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not misquoting you. I'm not
Right.
really quoting, but
You can harness the collective imagination or the dream ability to change the world, to change reality, to change physics, to change
yeah,
geology.
science.
Yeah. It's all just malleable like everything else here. There's nothing that's real here. It's all Maya. It's all perception. It's just different speeds, like you were talking about with the waking state versus the dreaming state. And that's very shamanic. Those are different speeds. They're not different in essence, they're just different in speed.
Well, we're on a planet right now that has been so overwhelmed with trafficking methodology. There's so much cult infrastructure and trafficking infrastructure that's been installed on the planet. People have lost their sense of how powerful we can be when we put our intentions and our dreaming together purposely, and honoring life energy, refusing to use trafficking modalities. Because what we see most of the time is that these really powerful influences, like where the power has been consolidated, and used to traffic populations, used to extract from populations, we see that kind of manifestational capacity being used to make things happen that we don't feel good about and we don't want to participate in. But once we remind ourselves that we have the power to put our energies together also in a very different way that refuses to leverage cult modalities on one another to do it, that the landscape of how power flows can really change.
Mm, how inspiring. I love that. I love that. So really, again, and this is what I say over and over in the book, the only way out is in. We can't solve this by looking at the systemic level. We have to solve this starting at the individual level. You can't heal the world without healing yourself. I'm just, really just threading a few things out there for people to consider. All of this looking outward, if you just look at what goes on in the truther community right now, and all of this research that's being applied to how the world works and what's going on out there and what happened in history and Tartaria and mud floods and all of this bullshit, none of it matters. It doesn't matter even if it's real, which it's not. It's just another perception. What matters is this inner work and the ability to harness our power as creative dreamers. If more people in these groups were actually putting their energy into this area, boy, I'd like to see what would happen then.
That's what I spend every day trying to facilitate. That's a deep, meaningful purpose for my heart. I'm really glad we're talking about it, because we all have much better options than we have yet been able to recognize. And people get their energy tied up in we've been lied to, and what are we going to do about it? But like, we could be building together now. And the most severely disabled people, the most severely disabled and invisible survivors of violence, have only found ourselves able to survive because we chose to do that. And we've been inviting people into it for years, but a lot of people, like, they're not sure what that means. It's like it's like they've got their hands around the bars of their cage, but the whole backside is open. There's no cage back here. But we're like, we gotta fight against the bars. We have to release ourselves from this prison. But if you put down the bars and you turn around, you're like, there's this whole world that
Yeah,
we
you
could be
walk away.
interacting with. We
You
could
just
be
walk
making
away.
things better. Yeah. And people don't realize it because they're so used to having to fight all the time. But there are people demonstrating now that we can just build beautiful things and have beautiful lives. So I'm into that. That's what I'm on board with.
But let me ask you, Max, how would people who want to be a part of what you're doing, who would like to learn more about what you're doing, what are your structures and resources for that? Whether we're talking websites, I mean, just give us a little bit of overview, because even for me, I'm a little like, I mean, we've had these conversations, but I'm not sure how this network that you're talking about actually operates, because sometimes I still feel like it's more like an underground kind of situation. And I'm wondering what your vision is moving forward for the network to become.
So our main location to find out what's going on is intuitivepublicradio.substack.com. That's called Max Memo. That's me introducing everyone to the work of our groups in the Intuitive Network. We primarily work on Telegram because most of our community members all over the world are in positions where, because of cult behavior and trafficking influences, it's not safe for them to be in a context with other people a lot of the time. Most of them can't even be in the small groups that we facilitate. Most of them have to stay in contact with me or others individually, because it would be too dangerous for them to try to be social when they've got to preserve their lives at this time. And then we have a lot of community members that participate in small private groups. There are a lot of small private groups in the network that we're working on various things. We're helping one another. We're processing challenging situations. We're building together. We're implementing amazing solutions that really move me. And then we have public groups and public channels on Telegram where anyone can come and join us, but you have to introduce yourself, because we might not be able to tell if you're a bot if you don't introduce yourself. So we remove people that don't introduce themselves after a period of time, basically. But the public spaces on Telegram can be found via Intuitive Public Radio on Telegram, is a channel on Telegram. And then we have a main public chat attached to that is at t.me/community IPR. So those are the main ways that people connect. But I spent a lot of time being the concierge person to help people be introduced to it. And anybody that we're talking with, we're looking for ways to help one another, so that somebody who comes into the network is bringing their strengths and their skill sets, but also their needs and their vulnerabilities. And like, how can we help anyone who comes to be in community with us? And how would they like to help out, so that we're all tending the community body, a real community body, not a cult community body. So that's what we're practicing together every day. And I would love to introduce anyone to it who reaches out to me on Substack or on Telegram. I'm t.me/Max Morris on Telegram. So yeah, I that's my day to day. Thank you for asking.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. I've been aware of the Telegram group. I have a kind of policy with I don't like to be part of groups where my work is being discussed a lot. So I just tend to stay away, and people can say whatever they want to say, but that's one of my reasons for keeping my distance, not because I'm not actually interested in what you're doing, but I don't necessarily need all that chatter when it happens, and sometimes it happens. So I hope you understand that.
Yes, absolutely. We have sort of different ways of moving items forward. Telegram is where we're doing a lot of that collaboration. There's some kind of machine happening here. It's kind of making my brain
Mm.
glitch. Um, we basically meet anybody we're in contact with where they're at. So I've found some really wonderful ways of getting to continue conversations with you. And because of the conversations you and I have had, I can bring so much amazing energy from my new understandings of my being in contact with your work, of me having discussed various things with you privately. I get to bring new energy into our group environments so that, like, even if you're not there with us, you're there with us, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think a little bit.
um that's really, it's really real for us. Most of the time what we encounter is that people don't want to be in conversation with survivors of these intersections.
Yes.
We speak very forthrightly, but we've also had experiences that really scare people who have not had some kind of understanding about that. So it's been very rare until recently for people to stay in conversation with us. And you've been in conversation with us for a while.
Right.
That's a big deal. And that's something we have really appreciated. And it's pretty rare for someone to be able to do that who isn't themselves in a really serious situation, like where they can't find help anywhere else. That's what we say in the network, is that we built a network for survivors who can't find help anywhere else, because that's what happened. But you've been present for us in ways I think you probably don't totally realize. So at least I can start to tell you more about it that way.
Oh, that's great. Well, I've been very interested in what you're doing, and certainly my growing awareness of the world cult and the trafficking patterns that we've been discussing has inspired me to learn more from you over time, and really just be receptive to your perspective, and I feel like I've just learned a lot from you, and I really appreciate your persistence and your presentness with me.
My pleasure. My honor. This is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I know that we we probably are at a good stopping point here. I feel like this is a lot of information for people to digest, and maybe this could be a prelude to some other discussions where we unpack more pieces of this dynamic that we've been talking about.
Will you also tell our viewers and listeners how they can find your recently released book, The World Cult and You, so that they can come join us more closely in these really important conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also over on Substack. It's soulluckman.substack.com. And basically, the way that works is I have a post, and it's linked to in different ways. There are various places, the about section, or the main image that you would click on, or there's a list of premium and exclusive content over on the right sidebar, or wherever you can find where to click, which is the post that has the link to the text. But you have to do a free trial or a paid subscription to be able to access the link. And when you've done that, then you can scroll down. There'll be a section that'll say like, how does this work? And here's the link, click over and then read the book. That's where I'm also going to be putting the audio visual book. I'm going to be sharing a few chapters of that, and then that's going to be paid beyond the first few chapters. And I'm going to serialize that project, and eventually I'll combine it into one big book and have that as a separate offering as well. So that's the Substack world, and I've got a bunch of material. I've got, the snooze is over there, the Callie the Destroyer. We didn't even get into that, but that's all about sacred ecology and the mother and our connection with the earth. That's a biggie. So there's a lot of content there that I would really encourage people to just, spend some time, either with your free trial, just really sort of binging, or, if you could spend a month or two behind my paywall, I think you would actually enjoy that and benefit from it. And then the kind of companion to my Substack is my YouTube, which is Crow Rising, crow like the bird rising. And I post a lot of the video content there that also shows up over on Substack. It's just easier for some people to access the YouTube videos, and you can embed those very easily on your websites and that kind of thing. And I do playlists. I'm doing a playlist for the Snooze audio video book, so you can just play through the playlist and that sort of thing. That makes it very, very easy. So I've put the YouTube and Substack worlds together kind of as bookends to give people the textual and the video all as one kind of large package. So that's my
I
world.
think it's important to realize that somebody who purchases an online course might pay $20 or $40 or $60, and that gives you a month or 2 months or 3 months in Saul Luckman's Substack, where there's such a huge amount of materials. So spending time with that as a learning project is more than worth the amount of money that it costs to connect with it. And of course, we have a lot of discussions about how do we help people connect with this when they don't have that available. But a lot of people are spending their money on much less life-affirming activities than learning these modalities. So I think it's a really, really good offering, and I hope that a lot of people take advantage of it and flow resource support to the work that you're doing.
I really appreciate that. I mean, obviously, it's important for me to, have this be remunerative to to a certain degree. I'm not trying to get rich, or believe me, I would be doing something else. I would be, in banking or somewhere. I mean, but that's not my dharma. I wanted to simply say that there's, other options too. There's the option to gift subscriptions to other people. So if people have resources and they would like to share that. I'm not exactly sure how that works in terms of, I know people have done it, but I haven't followed through myself to know exactly if you have to. I think you probably have to know to whom you're gifting the subscription when you do, and then you put in their email or whatever, and that's the person who then has access to the content behind the paywall for some period of time. But just know that there are ways, and if you ever want to discuss other methods for funding people who are, having issues with their funds, then I have ideas about that. So if anyone's out there who would like to help with that kind of project to get this material out to more people, I would be more than happy to have that discussion.
I'm really interested in those discussions too. We should keep talking about all of that, because we have to support platforms doing this work. We can't just leave it to chance. It really matters to people's survival. It really matters to people's ability to repair their physical bodies and find one another in a very chaotic, challenging world instance. So I would really like to work more on that with you and others. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's do it. And maybe we'll even come up with some basic concepts that other people could, adapt to their circumstances. Because I don't think there's a very easy way of doing what we're talking about yet. There's not, there. We keep seeing very interesting interfaces show up. I mean, we had PayPal for a long time, but then there was like Buy Me a Coffee and these other ways of being supported. But And then there's crowdfunding, of course, but I've not yet seen an easy way of doing what we're talking about, where people are basically trying to give resources to other people. That's an entire platform. If someone has the knowledge, the skill in coding and whatnot, that would be potentially a very successful platform.
That's a conversation very close to my heart. We do a lot of work in the Intuitive Network on that subject. I am so excited about having more of those conversations. We are co-creating the
Yeah, I
solutions.
even have I mean, I've thought about this a lot, Max. We are co-creating the name of this platform in my brain as a kind of working title is Pay It Forward with a four. Pay it forward so you're not in copyright problems. So pay it forward, and that would be it. Basically paying it forward. There's a movie that you can watch on this subject, and you really there's a whole topic here that we don't have time to discuss today, but it's servant leadership. We're really talking about servant leadership, where we're actually starting where we are as more like the adults in the room, and even that isn't a perfect state of being, because we're certainly learning and growing all the time too. I would speak kind of globally for most people who are interested in this kind of discussion. But then there are people who are in need or who are younger and don't have the resources, and if they could be given those resources by a pay it forward kind of program through a servant leadership, where your leadership is to serve. There's a whole school of psychology around servant leadership. So that would be an interesting discussion to have. But that's what I'm talking about here is creating a platform that would be based on concepts having to do with servant leadership.
Yes, more of that, please.
Yep. Yep.
Very much.
Well, listen, I'm going to let you go. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to our next chat.
Me too. Thank you for spending this time with me today.
Ditto, ditto. Onward and upward.